In this video, I'm going to explain how to write what's called a rhetorical précis. You're going to have to do this throughout the semester. For many of the reading assignments, I will ask that you write a précis instead of a summary. You can think of a précis as a more sophisticated, complex, more analytical version of a summary. Whereas a summary tells you what the text says, what the text that you're summarizing says, a précis tells you what the text says, but also how it says it, what rhetorical moves the writer is making. It comes from the French word for precise or specific. It's a highly structured 4-sentence paragraph. So it is very formulaic, it is very structured. You could almost do it like a template or like a fill in the blank. And I know that for some students that seems kind of frustrating because it is so rigid and formulaic, but most likely what will happen is you'll look at your completed précis and you'll be kind of impressed with yourself because it will sound much more sophisticated and much more analytical than just a generic summary. So let's take a look at the template, what you need to do in your précis. In your first sentence, you're focusing on the who, what, where, and the when. So the first step is to name the writer or the rhetorician or the painter. In this class, most of the time, it's going to be a writer. The title of the text, remember short works like articles or short stories go in quotation marks. Long works like novels or plays go in italics. The date it was written in and the place. So if the text originally was published in the Atlantic magazine, or maybe it was published in the New York Times, or maybe it was published in an academic journal, or maybe it was published on a blog. So where was the text published? All of those things should go in the first sentence. Also, a rhetorically active verb. So you don't just want to say something like writes or says. Your verb should be really specific, like argues, refutes, describes, contends, explains, urges. Try to use a really specific verb. And then, of course, a clause with the topic and the main idea of the text that you're going to be talking about. Usually that sentence will have a word like that in it. It will be a that clause, but a sentence that has the main idea of the work in question. For the second sentence, you're going to focus on the how. How is the writer conveying this message? So explain how the author or the writer develops and supports the main idea. So how is the text organized? Does the author start off by comparing and contrasting something and then bringing in academic sources and then bringing in data and then refuting counter arguments? Is it more of a narrative? How is the author conveying that main point? In the third sentence, you're focused on the why. So what is the writer's purpose? What is the intended purpose? And usually that will contain an in order. So the writer does such and such in order to. In other words, why is the writer writing this? And you're going to have to read between the lines a little bit to think about why the author is writing the article. In the fourth sentence, you want to think about for whom. So for whom is the writer writing? So the intended audience, the implied audience or the intended audience. And you can figure out the implied audience based on word choice, tone, where it's published, things like that. A couple of tips. You don't want to include your own opinion on the issue. So let's say the writer is writing an essay about automation. This is not the place to include your personal thoughts on automation. You don't want to use the same exact language as the original. So you really should not be doing lots of cutting and pasting from the original text. In an essay, of course, you want to provide quotations. You want to integrate quotations from the text. For a précis, you don't want to use a lot of the same language. Let's take a look at a sample précis. This comes from the University of Wisconsin-Madison Writing Center. And I've highlighted the 4 different sentences in 4 different colors to show you that even though there is room for creativity, the template itself is quite formulaic and you need to stick with those 4 sentences, and each sentence has a different purpose. Let's look at the first sentence in yellow. In The Trouble with Wilderness, or Getting Back to the Wrong Nature, the opening essay of the edited collection Uncommon Ground, Rethinking the Human Place in Nature, renowned environmental historian Willem Cronin critiques the romantic idolization of supposedly untouched vast wilderness and argues that such a perspective of wilderness negatively affects humankind's relationship with nature. Okay, so first off, the writer has included the title of the article in question in quotation marks. If it's an article or a short story, it goes in quotes. Then the date of publication, and then where it was published. In this case, it's an edited collection or some sort of anthology, so that edited collection goes in italics. The name of the writer, the first name and the last name, the first time you reference the writer, is included, and also a little bit of context, a little bit of information about who that writer is, right? If I didn't know who William Cronon was, and I didn't, I now know that he's a renowned environmental historian. And then, of course, importantly, the writer of this précis includes the main idea of the text, the topic and the main idea. Let's look at the next sentence. Cronon builds a historical case for wilderness as a human construct, explores the cultural and literary foundations for the belief that wilderness is a sublime frontier, identifies the problematic paradoxes inherent in this belief, and outlines the detriments of and possible paradigm-shifting solutions to this environmental problem. So when I'm reading this précis, I can really tell that the writer looked through the text in detail to see how Cronon is making certain moves, what he's doing, how he's building his argument, how he's building his case that the wilderness is this human construct. So notice how there's words like explores, identifies, outlines, showing me that the writer of this précis understands how the writer of the article is making certain moves and how he is manipulating the reader. By the way, when I say manipulate, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Let's look at the next sentence in purple. Cronon opposes the perspective of wilderness as an idealized, non-human space in order to persuade his readers to live rightly in relationship to nature and embrace the reality that home, as a welcoming, responsibility-requiring place, encompasses both wilderness and civilization. So this gets to the why. Why is Cronon making this argument? What is his purpose? What is he trying to do? The green sentence is all about the how. How is Cronon building this argument? The yellow sentence is all about just what. Who is Cronon? What is he arguing? Where did he argue it? What's his main idea? And then finally, we have the blue sentence. According to his specific identification, scholarly presentation, and publication venue, Cronon's primary audience includes American environmentalist academics. So this sentence is supposed to tell the reader who the audience is. So to whom is Cronon writing? And that can be difficult to figure out, but the fact that the writer of this précis says, well, he's writing in a scholarly venue, his word choice is sort of academic, suggests that he's writing to other professionals. He's not just writing to anyone. He's not writing to a general audience. He's writing to academics, and not just any academic, but people who are environmentalists, who are already familiar with many of these concepts. So this is an example of a précis that's really working. This précis is going to tell the reader of the précis that the writer understands what the text is saying, how the text is saying it, and why the author of the text is making certain moves. I hope that helps.